Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It. Today, we're going to talk about behaviors that make us crazy and how things go south when we enable them. How are we handling these things? Are we in the way of making the relationship better? Or are we making it worse? Maybe inadvertently and maybe sometimes on purpose without even knowing it. Like, think about that for a second. We're all in the process of, trying to navigate our marriage as well. We want you to have a great marriage. And we know you're here because you've got some challenges. And I want to normalize that. That's like, who doesn't? The marriage is tough. It's the toughest thing you're ever going to do, other than raise children, which also is difficult. But eventually, if you do it well enough, they leave. And then, and then you're stuck with your marriage again. But our point today is there's some things that happen in marriages very, very commonly that if we don't address them, then we end up making the problems worse. And so we want to be part of the solution to some of these things instead of continuing the problem. So I'm with our favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove. Kyle, good to see you. This is some tough stuff that we're talking about today.
No doubt about it. I don't think that there is any job that gets less praise and that requires more work than parenting. And when I say more work, I'm not talking about the physical labor necessarily. I'm not talking about the kind of work we would think about when we go to a job, 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, whatever the case may be. But I'm talking about the kind of the work that where every decision has a lot of weight that goes with it. Every choice means a lot. Everything that we try to impart into our children has lasting implications, hopefully lasting value in a positive way. But the thing that we don't always stop and realize is that the things that we intentionally choose to share and to teach our children, as good as they are and as positive as they can, as positive an impact as they can have on our kids, all the things we don't want people to know about, those also imprint themselves. And probably the worst one I can think of, the worst parental sin that we tend sometimes to commit over and over and over again is inconsistency, especially amongst or between the parents in terms of how we go about doing life with kids. And we'll set boundaries and then we won't uphold them. And I don't think it has, this is not exclusive to parenting. This comes down to boundary setting, period. In relationships, it's easy to set them. It's not difficult to understand something needs to be done and what it is. But following through is a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're a parent and you're married today, our goal for you is to walk away from this conversation with some tools you can use, some ideas you can implement that will help you and your spouse get on the same page. In the worst of worlds, you have this situation, and I just want to describe the ugliest of the ugly, where you have one parent and the other parent, and they pit the children against the other parent. They try to, win the child's favor in an attempt to one up the other parent. And that is just a horrible, horrible situation. You see that in divorces, absolutely, but you also see it in really unhealthy marriages.
Yes.
Yeah. And one of the things that people don't realize is that we're wired, men and women, and no, this isn't a politically correct opinion. I'm sorry, it's biology, but we're wired differently by God. Men have a higher risk tolerance than women do. If you see a woman walking down the street with a toddler, she's got that 18-month-old, 3-year-old, whatever, right next to her, holding by the hand. The dude is free ranging that kid. Like, it can be 20 feet away and he's perfectly comfortable. Every mom that drives by that is holding her breath, right? Like, it's like, yeah, no. But that's so necessary because we are seeing the outcome of bubble wrapped children in our universities today. They don't have grit. They don't have tenacity. Parents are having to talk. Well, they're not having to. Parents are talking to professors in universities about the grades their children are getting. It's really unhealthy. We're keeping kids way too young. And it starts when they're little, and it starts in the home, and it starts with the dynamic between mom and dad. And two people, two genders, totally different ways of doing things. And we need to wrestle those things out so that we're on the same team with what's best for that kid. And it is hard stuff, really hard, but worth doing.
Well, I think it's time to say goodbye to our audience. It's been a great show today, Nina. We're just going to wrap it up right there because
Yeah,
you just
I think
said,
I turned everybody off.
no, 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 no. You said so much in your introduction there to this topic. Um, let's start with the factors that determine a parenting style,
Hmm.
and there are several of them, and they do get intertwined. The factors, not necessarily the idea of what kind of parent I want to be, or what kind of parent we as a couple, whoever that couple might, your spouse is. Um, what are the factors that determine the kind of parenting that child walks out of that house with when they become an adult? And the first one that we have to recognize is the style of parenting that they grew up under.
Mhm.
And when two people come together and say I do, or I will, or I might, they the I might comes, I think, before the engagement ring, and then the I will, and then there's the never mind. Anyhow, the those types of the households that they grew up in and the parenting styles that existed there, they're never going to be identical. They may be similar but never identical. They may seem more similar than they actually are, and the only way that we figure that out is when it gets tested with real life. Also, there's the I call it the dream phase. We dream together, we plan our future together, we think about how wonderful things are going to be because we check all the boxes and everything in life is going to line up just so for us. And then we talk about the kind of parents, what kind of kids we want, that we want them to turn out to be, and what we'll do as parents. But then when it actually happens, we don't do the same things. Sometimes we don't even go in the same directions.
Mhm.
And I will just tell you from my own experience that takes a toll on a marriage. And there's another factor, another huge influencer in how this happens, and that is that we have to consider not only uh, marriages from a first family where everybody is the only mom they ever knew, is the only dad they ever knew, only brothers and sisters and so forth, but blended families.
Mm, mhm.
This is a huge, red hot issue, and it has been ever since blended families.
Yeah.
To have people who've already gotten their momentum under them, they already have their legs under them as far as parenting is concerned, and although the man woman relationship is exciting and it's good and it feels strong, when it comes to how we go about disciplining our children and raising our children, that can often end that relationship because there's a whole lot more dynamics at play when your kids are already there than before you have children and you're talking about how you're going to do these things.
Well, it never goes the way that you think it's going to. I was a great parent of other people's children before I had my own kids.
Yeah.
Like you'd see them in the grocery store, and I would think to myself these judgmental thoughts of my children will never XYZ that, and then you have them and you discover, wow, no, this is hard. And these little creatures have wills, and then they have ugly behavior, and then they do that in public. It's just really challenging. And then you have the different styles, like you said, it's probably pretty common. Like all the people that I work with, everybody's got completely different parenting styles. Like one person has somebody that's, really hands-on, even maybe controlling. right? And then somebody else has someone that, well, let's write that up as neglect and, CPS should have been called. You got, you got free range to the extreme or, or actually something really healthy even compared to something not. Like, it's really mismatched. You don't ever see people that both of them had this really healthy, beautiful thing growing up. Like, that just doesn't exist. And I like Adam and Eve in the garden because even they, like, God is their dad physically with them, and they're not happy with what he's given them. Like, yeah, anybody that's raised teenagers knows what it's like to live in the constant discontent of that animal. Like, that's a thing. But it does wear on a marriage. It makes it super, super tough. And so if you're going into the preteen years, or if you're going into the new baby years, you got to be prepared for life as you know it is about to get dismantled. And if the marriage is struggling already, like, that makes everything worse.
It absolutely does. And I think sometimes the role or the roles that people feel like are theirs to play in this, in doing life with kids, they don't give it a lot of thought until they're in the middle of it, and suddenly
Mhm.
they have to.
Mhm.
We and it starts at birth.
Mhm.
You know, how many times have you seen a husband and his mother, which is the wife's mother-in-law, get
Mhm.
sideways? Just when the moment, or you bring the child home, and it's how are you going to do things? And somebody makes a suggestion, and somebody doesn't necessarily know if they agree with that suggestion, and then the next thing you know, you have conflict between the husband and the wife
Yep.
because you're not supporting me.
Yep.
You're not doing what I want to do, and everybody's opinions are being thrown in. It's a
Mhm.
really difficult time if you allow it to be. And I think this the most intelligent parents, new parents, are the ones, if the baby is healthy and they've got what they need to manage at home, is to lock that door for a few weeks,
Mhm.
and say, let's get used to this situation together
Mhm.
without the input and the influence of a lot of other people, and let's kind of get the ball rolling in a way where we are functioning as a team.
Right.
We're having some new experiences, and we learn how to handle them, and we agree that this is the way we're going to do things, and then let everybody else throw their stuff in, and we'll just let it bounce off.
Well, I think you hit on something really important. And this is something that nobody really tells you, but you kind of eventually, hopefully, learn, maybe by accident, or maybe somebody did tell you, like if you have a mentor as you're trying to navigate this stuff. But that is, don't gossip about your kids. Don't complain to your parents or his parents, or your spouse's parents, about your children or your spouse. um yeah, have some people in your life that bring you wisdom, so mentoring relationships, that's different. But in all of that, make sure you and your spouse are on the same page, so you're not, because we have a hard enough time being solid in our identity, but you bring a parent of yours into this conversation as you're trying to raise your own child, then you have this outside influence that you already struggled with trying to break free of, and form this new identity, this new unit. It doesn't go very well if you're complaining. They want to help, so they'll tell you a thing to do, and then if you don't do it, or your spouse doesn't want to do that, then you got this other mess, right? And so I think we make a lot of mistakes by how we talk about our kids.
Let me pick it up there and say, one of the things that is so difficult in early in a marriage, especially if the two people being married are very young, is who are our go-tos when we struggle? Naturally, I mean, our go-tos are our parents. And so when we struggle with our new spouse, or we struggle as a new parent, or we struggle literally in any way, our instinctive default is to go back to our own parents. And that puts them in a very awkward
Hmm.
place.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't even realize it, though, because they're going to stick up for their own kid
Right.
almost every time. The wise old parent at that point is going to say, I don't know that this is a discussion that you and I need to have together.
Yep.
You know, I know that you need to talk to somebody, and I really want to encourage you to begin looking for people that you can trust to do this with. But how healthy is it for me to share with my parent struggles that I'm having with my spouse?
Mhm.
You know, if their desire is to be what they need and want to be to both of us.
Right. Yeah, it puts them in a tough space, and it really isn't fair. Yeah, and that's kind of the situation that we're dealing with when we're looking at our kids, and we go to our spouse and we're complaining about our kids as if our children are harming us. And we're sitting, that's a thing. Like, it bugs me to no end when we don't realize that we're the adult in the room. And if our kids' behavior is injuring us, we need to take a really good hard look at what is it in us that has us needing something from someone who is completely incapable of filling that need. Like, we need to get our relationship needs met by God first, and our spouse and our friends, our family, whatever, but not our children. Those are people that are entrusted to our care to disciple and raise. And when they're adults, maybe you can be friends with them. But like, this was like one of the most incredible awarenesses that a pastor friend of mine gave me when I was raising my kids were really young. He said, your job is not to be liked by them. Your job is to raise them, to make them into people that are operating in integrity, following Jesus Christ, that can say yes, can say no, and know who they are in those moments. And I was like, oh, so I can't be hurt by my kids. He goes, well, you can, but that's really unhealthy. You have to recognize that if your feelings are being harmed by your children, there's something upside down inside of you.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really great, because it totally changed my perspective on parenting.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when you see these parents that have the, best friend relationship with their children, it's typically not something uh, that is being pushed by the child.
Right.
It's something that's being pushed by the parent,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
it's
And there's an
it's fulfilling a
identity.
need for the parent way
Yep.
more than it is for anyone else.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And the reality is that your kids are not going to like you when you tell them no. And sometimes you'll tell them yes to things you shouldn't say yes to, and they'll like you even less. Like, but they won't in that moment. Like, so we have to remember that we're the ones that are the adult in the room when we're raising them. We're in the leader seat, and we're in that leader seat with our spouse. That's super, super important to recognize that. And so we don't want to diminish our spouse's authority, and we don't want them diminishing ours. And so there's a lot of need for pausing conversations when one of the spouses goes off the deep end, because that happens for real.
It
Uh,
does, but let's talk about that. Let's talk a little
yeah.
bit about conversations that parents have
Mhm.
about kids in front of kids. And is it so unusual to expect that when something happens and we have to address it, and as we're going through the process of talking about what's going to happen as a result of an undesirable behavior, that one parent disagrees with what the other parent is saying?
Mhm.
So we need to learn to have these conversations and have a plan.
Mhm.
It's not a matter of if we're going to disagree with one another at some point in time. It's a matter of when.
Yep.
So when we have this situation where one of us is going after it and the other is thinking to themselves, I don't know that I agree with that.
Mhm.
Is that the time to make that known?
I would say absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
and
the
and
worst thing you can do.
yeah, so closet conversations have to be something that we understand and that we know are going to be a real thing, and that we're going to stand by whatever our spouse is laying out there in that moment, and then we'll have a conversation in the closet
Mhm.
after the child is no longer in the room, in a place where we are absolutely assured that nobody is listening.
Mhm.
And then we share our concern,
Yep.
and if we're mature adults and we're trying to do uh, God's best, not only for us as parents, but for our children, then hopefully we come to some places where we have, agreement about, okay, this is okay because, or maybe that was not a great idea because, and then we go about just fixing it. We don't have to, children should not really ever know when parents are not aligned in terms of what to do in certain situations of discipline.
Yeah, the whole your dad and I need to talk about that. And then teenagers that will try to fry you in
Right,
public, right? In front of their siblings and in
right.
front of their spouse. Well, mom, aren't you going to say something? It's like, I can see where both of you are coming from. And I think it'd be good if your dad and I have a conversation around this.
Absolutely.
You don't take sides. And I think that thing you said earlier about doesn't feel supported. Like that's one of the biggest complaints that parents that can't do this well say about the other person is, well, they don't support me. Well, yeah, it's because two things are happening. Number one, you're flying off doing this thing. Like, I wish I had an analogy for it, but it's kind of like your Lone Ranger style doing a thing without discussing it with your spouse in the first place. And you're doing it in an emotional way. So there's that. And then on top of it, there's not just a real clear, we talk together before we levy discipline. As one person tries to control something and do things, and it is hard because, typically one parent's around the kids more than the other. That just happens with work schedules and things like that. And so that person that's around them sometimes feels like, well, I've got more say in the matter. Well, no, you don't. Like you're either one with your spouse or you're not. And if you're one with your spouse, you're a team. And so those things, everybody needs to understand. We don't ride roughshod over the other person or the kid. We look at what's happening and we're like, okay, I think I'm gonna have a discussion with your mother around this and hold that thought. But we don't get swept up into it. And yeah, it's challenging to raise kids, but if our kids are making us emotional, we have some triggers within us that need to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big point that needs to be made to people too, because we get upside down because of stuff within us, not because of other people's behavior.
And
Because we should
nobody
expect
likes
kids.
nobody likes conflict.
Right.
Nobody enjoy well, maybe there's a few people who enjoy it, but most people don't like conflict. There's some people who thrive in it, but there one of the things that often happens in a household when inevitably there becomes conflict between a parent and children is that the other parent can't stand the fact that there's conflict, and they feel like it becomes their job to fix this thing that feels broken to them.
Right. Yep.
And the reality is that conflict is natural. That conflict is something that's going to happen in every relationship, every parent-child relationship, every parent-parent relationship, literally any relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And to go in and try to make that to pull that conflict out and say no, 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 we can't have that here, I think is a real mistake. Now, if we're not well versed in how to do conflict and how to make conflict a learning and positive experience, then maybe we need a little help there.
Mm-hmm.
But what tends to happen in these situations is one person, one parent, finds themselves in conflict with the child more often. They probably are the parent that is more, I don't want to go to the extent of saying rigid, but is more likely to hold the line,
Mm-hmm.
while the other parent is probably more permissive.
Right.
And that's going to be the parent that cannot stand the atmosphere when there is tension in it and will do anything to make sure it's not. They see themselves as the peacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's something important. They're wrong. They're not the peacemaker. They're the peacekeeper.
Right.
And here's the difference. If you study through history, go through biblical history if you want to, or any history, people who were about making peace get bloody. People who are about making peace toe the line.
Yep.
They stand up for what they believe is right and they will fight to the death for it.
They tell the truth.
Yes. Peacekeepers, on the other hand, just want the tension gone.
Yep.
They want the tension gone. The problem is, even though they may be able to allay the tension, the problem still exists.
Mhm.
The original issue did not get dealt with.
Yeah, and in general, when you look at the Big Five personality index, it measures agreeableness in people. It's one of the personality measurements on there. And women tend to be more agreeable than men are. And it's not positive or negative. I mean, there's good things about being agreeable and there's terrible things about being agreeable. Um, you need to have both, and you need to navigate those things so that you can parent well together. I think that's what's, by design. But one of the things that we see with women is they're so averse to conflict that they'll people please to avoid it, right? And then they end up betraying themselves. And then what happens out of that is that they're people pleasing so much that nobody is getting the benefit of truth in that relationship. We've enabled a lot of really unhealthy things.
Yes.
And, that's one of the things, if I could just invite people here for a second, if you're a woman and you're struggling with this, we want to invite you to our annual conference, the Strength and Dignity Conference. It's in May here in Ohio. And we help women overcome this. And yeah, we focus on women because it is, I mean, it's just the nature of the research, and it is cross-cultural, it's reliable, it's valid. In general, women are more agreeable than men. And as a result of that, we get in trouble when we can't tell the truth. And so if you're struggling with that, and you feel like you're getting walked on and losing your identity, please check it out on our website at greaterimpact.org. But you find that kind of thing showing up in a relationship, and it can destroy it because nobody's telling the truth.
It can. And then and the other part of that is that if it's mom who is averse to conflict and gets a Twitter when there's conflict between dad and kid, and mom interjects or tries to make peace.
Mhm.
When dad picks up the ball again and continues with the process, it's not just the kid he's upset with,
Mhm.
it's mom.
Yep.
And unchecked, that can turn into a really dicey situation for the child.
Mhm.
So we have to be careful and understand and compartmentalize, but I mean, hopefully we are better communicators than that, and we've met this need before it even happens.
Mhm.
And we don't have to find ourselves in this spot. We're not always going to agree on how to do things, when to do things, or if we even do anything.
Mhm.
We got to remember that in the process of raising children, discipline is about teaching.
Yeah.
Punishment is about anger.
Ooh, talk more about that.
Yeah. Knowing that, do we want to teach our children, or we just want to show them how mad we are?
Mm.
And of course, it depends on how people use the words, of course. These are the things that come to mind. When I hear the word punishment, I always kind of cringe because I feel like there's going to be something coming behind that is just a matter of showing you my might and showing you the wrath that I have in this situation because you have so disappointed me. There's going to be punishment. Grr. Discipline usually takes a little more time because we have to stop and think, what's going to be the best outcome for my child in this situation? And I'm a firm believer that sometimes a firm pop in the behind is the best thing for very young children. Okay. But beyond that, it becomes a matter of us putting some time and effort into the process of saying, what's going to create the best outcome for my children down the road as they move forward? This choice was already made. Okay. What's going to happen next time they're faced with that same choice? How can I teach them? What's the best teachable moment here? The best thing I can do as a parent to help them learn. And sometimes that still has to hurt,
Mhm.
not physically, but it has to hit them somewhere that's important. And that's where parenting gets difficult.
Yeah.
And I've worked with CPS for better part of 2 decades in my career and learned early on that sometimes good parents make poor choices that change the lives of everybody in the family.
Hmm.
And the reason they make those poor choices is because they run out of ideas. And the only reason they run out of ideas is because they haven't done any work before the fact.
Mm.
And they're allowing that frustration then to begin running the show.
Yeah.
And that is often when bad things happen in families that are initiated by parents who are really pretty good people.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a thing right there. And doing the work that we have within us. Because I think it should be a red flag to every parent out there that if I'm emotional over something my kid has done, that's a cue for me to do some work within myself. Those steps that we recommend, um, talking to, a therapist, a coach, getting some help in that space. Because as if you're going to sit in the leader's seat, you don't get mad, you don't get emotional over the people you lead and their behavior. It's our job to disciple. That's what I
Yeah.
mean. Discipline, hello. That's the root of that is discipleship, which is a teaching and a coaching kind of experience. You help people. That's the job. And so if we're not finding joy in that, that's something within us that's going awry or a miscue because of some lie we believe or some need we're trying to get filled with somebody who's not capable. They're a child,
Yeah.
even if they're 17 and, being super ugly. That's still not about us. It's
You still
about,
got the best part of a decade in front of them before that brain is completely developed and that it can
yeah.
understand cause and effect.
Yeah. So why are we taking something personal that's coming out of something that's half cooked,
Right.
And I love my kids and stuff, but as they get older, I'm really enjoying, like I've always enjoyed my kids. Most of the time. There's some moments where I was like, yeah, this is not fun. But they as they get older, like you really start to see them as total adult people. And they're just not any younger. So you can't put any weight into their criticisms of us or their emotional behaviors or whatever. We have to balance that with the hormones that they have going off in their heads, the upside down goals that they have, the lack of wisdom that they've got. And then on top of that, recognize within ourselves, is there something that we should be doing to grow so that we're not taking their behavior personally?
Yeah.
Yeah. Parents that get their identity from how their kid performs, ouch, like super unhealthy.
Yeah. When that
Not,
kid becomes your report card,
uh-huh. Yeah, no.
there's a problem.
Yeah, and I don't I mean, it's nice when your kids do well, but you have to realize you can't take credit for that. God wired them that way. And maybe you created an environment where they could thrive. Awesome. You still don't get to take credit for that. You also don't take responsibility for their screw ups either. And
Exactly.
maybe you created an environment where it was easier for them to screw up. Well, that's yours to own. But what's also true is they have free will. And so we don't want to sit in a space where we're trying to get something from them, but instead we're leading them, which is a servant's role if we do biblical leadership.
We see that free will early, very early on.
Ha!
Uh,
Birth.
yeah, maybe before. But when they finally get the mental acuity to begin exercising, it usually is about adolescence.
Mhm.
And it has long been said that 13-year-olds are perfect examples of why most mammals eat their young. Um, and we cannot
Yeah.
resolve that.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Yeah. I actually really enjoyed my kids as teenagers. I found them
I do too.
really entertaining to watch, but I didn't get, and thanks to the advice of the pastor, I didn't get my identity wrapped up in their behavior. And it was good because I had a couple that did some wild and crazy things that I'm like, well, yeah, they did that. I just, I didn't look at myself as a terrible parent,
Yeah.
even though some people tried to, put me in that box. It's like, yeah, no, sorry, no. And that's normal kid stuff. Like they make terrible decisions sometimes, right? They really do. And if you get off without somebody doing that, well, they're gonna later. just so you know, it's going to happen because they're not done growing. They don't have common sense yet. It's all good. So what's one thing you'd like to leave our listeners with today, Kyle, around this topic?
Two things. One is for those parents who are young and have not yet experienced, or for adults that are young, married, not having experienced parenthood yet, proactivity. Be proactive. Understand that there is a lot you can learn about parenting before the fact.
Mhm.
And a lot of understandings that you can come to. Go see somebody about it. Don't feel like that you have to be in the midst of a crisis to see a therapist. But a lot of therapists, a lot of family therapists can give you some phenomenal feedback in terms of what, not just what to expect, but some things to do now
Mm.
that will make that parenting experience go quite a bit smoother than everything catching you by surprise. And the second thing is to understand before you become a parent. And if you're already a parent, it's not too late. But understand that that actually has to be considered, if not in fact, um, close to it. Parenting needs to be our primary full-time job. And it's not that we can't have another job, but understanding that the other job pales in importance
Mhm.
to raising godly, qualified children who can walk out of the home when they're adults with an understanding of who they are and whose they are,
Mhm.
and not be so totally lost that every little wind that blows hurts their feelings and offends them and causes them to be afraid. Um, if that's the case, we haven't done our jobs.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And, I think along with that is, doing whatever it takes for somebody to be around for that to happen. You know, I'm certainly not everybody, right? But one decision I'm really thankful for is that when Jim and I decided to have kids, um, I really wanted to be home and raise them. And I know that's not politically correct to say, like go climb the corporate ladder, like whatever. Nobody dies wishing they spent more time at the office.
Exactly.
And I'm so thankful. Like I worked part-time the entire, I've always worked since I've been 13 years old. And when I had kids, I worked part-time and it's gone maybe 10, 15 hours a week. And their dad was with them. Sometimes I hired a babysitter, but I don't regret any of that. And I homeschooled mostly too. And I don't regret any of that. And there's very few things that you have the opportunity to make an impact on. And it is worth your kids having to struggle with less than their peers. Like that will toughen them up, for real. So what if you have to
Undoubtedly.
live if you have to live in a smaller house, if you don't get to eat out every night, you know, it's, there's no reason to keep up with the Joneses. What they learn about relationships and having confidence and being able to weather, developing grit, I'm all for it. And somehow God blesses all of that anyway. Like it's just a thing to take a look at. And I know there's a lot of families that are like, oh, we can't do that. There's just no way. Okay, fair enough. But in whatever way you can structure your work life so that you're with your kids, I would encourage you to do so because they're worth it. And you get just a tiny window and you don't want to live with regret at the end of it. Because the designer, food, clothes, none of that matters. It's the time. It's all worth
That's
it.
how love is spelt.
Yeah.
Time.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, guys, for popping by. Thank you, Kyle, for sharing some wisdom around this topic today. I just want to encourage you to go to our website, greaterimpact.org. There's a free ebook about Stop Walking on Eggshells. And you can find out more about our annual conference there, too. If you find yourself a people pleaser, if you want to become a woman of strength and dignity, you can join that particular e-course membership or the conference and learn more. We also have a marriage course called 2.0 Your Marriage. So if you're a man or woman looking to improve your married life, That would be something to check out as well. And be sure to tune into the next episode and learn more about dealing with conflict. Thanks for being here.